Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously don't take every alleged Bigfoot video seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers. So, when they tell us they've seen video they think is legit, we take a look, too. People who seriously study Bigfoot aren't the type to believe every grainy forest clip they see online. In fact, they're usually the first ones to call out fakes. So, when one of them says they've seen footage that might actually be the real deal, you can bet we're leaning in to watch, too. From quietly swapping out trail cam cards to locking eyes with something that shouldn't even exist, this story starts like a peaceful morning in the woods and ends with one of the clearest Bigfoot videos the internet has ever obsessed over. Life in the woods. Jake had been tucked away on 40 acres of thick green forest in Michigan for almost a decade. His land sat about 15 miles northeast of Eureka with no traffic and no neighbors, just trees and winding trails for miles. He ran a small logging business and knew every bend, clearing, and creek like the back of his hand. The forest was his backyard and his comfort zone. Over the years, he'd seen black bears shuffle through, mountain lions slipping between the shadows, and whole herds of elk moving in near silence. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could prepare him for what turned up that Sunday morning. Do you see that? I'm afraid. Oh my God. Oh my God. Jake had invested in 6 high-end Rechenix trail cameras scattered across his land. They weren't cheap, but they were worth it for tracking wildlife and keeping an eye on the far corners of his property. His usual morning routine was pretty simple. Brew coffee, check the weather, and then head out on his ATV with fresh SD cards. That day in May was no different. A drizzle in the air. The kind of damp that makes the forest smell rich and earthy. One of his cameras was tucked 2 miles deep into the woods, way past where any road reached, far from any cell signal. Out there, it was just ancient trees, thick undergrowth, and quiet so deep you could hear your own heartbeat. That particular camera pointed toward a natural clearing, a favorite spot for deer and sometimes a curious bear to wander through. When Jake finally got home and slotted the SD card into his laptop, he expected the usual, a few deer nosing around, maybe a raccoon doing raccoon things, but the very first clip stopped him cold, his chest tightened. The first sign in the soft early morning light, something stood upright in the clearing. It wasn't far away. It wasn't out of focus. It was clear, and it was massive. The figure towered around 7 foot tall, covered in dark, shaggy fur, standing like a person, not like a bear, awkwardly balancing on its back legs. Jake had seen enough bears up close to know the difference. This thing's arms were long, its shoulders broad, and its shape looked too human. The timestamp read 4:23 a.m. The creature didn't dart away. It just stood there motionless. 47 whole seconds. 3 separate images before it disappeared back into the trees. And the clearest frame, you could make out its face with a heavy brow, deep-set eyes that looked right at the camera. Not wild, not panicked, but calm and curious, almost thinking. Jake sat at his desk staring at that image for nearly 2 hours. His mind kept throwing out possible explanations. Maybe it was someone in a costume. Maybe a weird trick of light. Maybe the camera glitched. But he'd been using trail cams for over a decade. He knew the difference between bad angles, blurs, or digital hiccups. This didn't have the fingerprints of a fake. That night, Jake barely slept. Every creak of the floor, every groan of the wind on the roof made him tense up. It felt like something was out there watching. By midnight, he'd made up his mind. He was going back to that same spot, only this time with full video equipment. The next day, he charged every battery, packed all his gear, and mentioned to his neighbor Pete that he'd be doing some night photography. He didn't bring up the creature. Pete already thought Jake was a bit eccentric for living way out here alone. Dropping Bigfoot into the conversation would have locked in the crazy label forever. By Monday evening, Jake drove his pickup until the old logging road ran out, then hiked another mile with 60 pounds of gear strapped to his back. He set up camp about 100 yards from where the camera had caught the creature. From there, he had a perfect hidden view of the clearing. The plan was simple. Stay out of sight, watch, record, and if that thing showed itself again, this time Jake would get it all on video. But as the forest settled into the night, the stillness took on a strange weight. The sounds shifted, and what ended up happening wasn't anything like what Jake thought he'd planned for. At first, it felt calm, almost peaceful. The woods had a slow, steady rhythm, the kind of quiet that isn't truly silent if you've lived around it before. Somewhere far away, an owl called into the night. Tiny feet scurried through the underbrush. A gentle breeze moved through the tall redwoods, making that soft whispering sound trees make when they've been standing there for hundreds of long, patient years. For a while, it felt almost relaxing, like the forest was gently easing him into the night. Jake sat quietly in the dark, his Sony video camera ready in his hands, the small infrared beams slowly tracing the tall tree line in front of him. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed strange or unusual. And then around 11 p.m., the forest flipped a switch. It didn't just get quieter. It still went dead. No bugs buzzing, no birds chirping, not even that faint, constant hum of life you normally get in the woods at night. Jake knew that change too well. In the forest, that kind of silence only means one thing. Something big is close. Big enough that everything else freezes. That's when he heard it. A single stick snapped on the other side of the clearing, maybe 50 yards away. Then came another sound, and this one hit differently. Slow, heavy footsteps. Not the light, quick shuffle of a deer. These were steady, deliberate, two-legged. Jake raised the camera and flicked the infrared on, but all it showed was a wall of thick trees. The footsteps stopped. The quiet wrapped around him again. 10 long minutes crawled by. Then came a sound that made his chest tighten. A deep, low growl mixed with something that almost sounded like a whistle. It wasn't loud, but it carried like it was meant to be heard. Jake had heard every kind of animal call out here. Bears, cougars, coyotes, but nothing like this. And the strangest part, the sound didn't stay in one spot. It shifted. It echoed. It was as if whatever was making it was circling him in a wide arc. He realized he'd been holding his breath. The moment he exhaled, something moved. At the very edge of the tree line, a shape detached itself from the darkness. It wasn't just a shadow. It had weight to it. And for something that big, it moved with a smoothness that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Through the infrared, Jake saw it step into the clearing. It was the same creature from the trail cam. Only now, it wasn't a frozen image. It was there, breathing, alive. The figure stood at least 7.5 feet tall, shoulders wide before tapering down at the waist. It was built like a person, only larger, stronger, dark brown fur, nearly black, covered it from head to toe, thick enough to shrug off the chill in the air. But it wasn't just the size that made Jake's pulse spike. It was the way it moved. Every step was smooth, deliberate, not stiff, not awkward, like someone in a costume. When it turned its head, it didn't snap around. It flowed like it was part of the forest itself. For about 5 minutes, it stayed in the clearing, turning its head now and then, like it was listening for something. Then it looked directly toward Jake's hiding spot. Even through the fuzzy green glow of the infrared, he could see the eyes, large, dark, and aware. These weren't the vacant eyes of a wild animal. There was thought behind them. For a few long seconds, neither of them moved. It was like the forest itself had frozen to give them that moment. Jake couldn't tell if he was the one doing the watching or if he was the one being studied. Then it started walking toward him. Step by slow step, closing the distance like it already knew exactly where he was. Jake's hands began to shake, the camera bobbing in his grip. His instincts screamed at him to bolt, but he couldn't move. Fear and awe kept him rooted to the spot. At 30 yards, the details came into focus. The face was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Part gorilla, part human, heavy brow like an ape, but the nose and lips were shaped more like a man's. Its arms were long, longer than any person's, but not cartoonishly so. It felt both familiar and alien, like it belonged in some strange space between a species we know and one we're not supposed to. At 20 yards, it stopped, tilted its head, studied him. Not scared, not aggressive, just curious. And that's when Jake realized something that chilled him more than anything. This thing wasn't trying to avoid him. It was here for him. He was the one being examined. Jake tried to keep still, but his breathing sounded too loud in the dead, silent forest. Then it moved again, 15 yards now, close enough for Jake to smell it. And it wasn't just the musky scent of fur or the dampness of the woods. It was a heavy musky scent like a wet dog, but sharper, wilder. There was something earthy under it, almost like damp soil after rain. But it wasn't comforting. It was primal, the kind of smell that sets off alarms in your brain before you even know why. Jake's chest tightened. Every nerve felt lit up. Then, just as the tension peaked, his camera gave a soft click and went dead. The screen went black. The infrared light blinked out and suddenly, Jake was blind. Darkness swallowed the clearing in an instant. He could barely see his own hands. Panic flared. He dug into his pack, searching for a backup battery. His fingers were shaking so hard he dropped it once, twice before finally slotting it in. The camera came back to life with a sharp green glow, but the creature was gone. Not walking away, not slipping between trees, just gone like it had been erased from the world without a single sound. The forest stayed still for a moment longer, then almost casually came back to life. The world pretended nothing had happened. Jake just sat there, breathing hard, camera in hand, trying to understand what he'd seen. He finally forced himself to move, packed up, stood, started the long walk back to his truck. That's when he froze again. Fresh footprints surrounded his vehicle. Huge human-shaped pressed deep into the mud. The stride was massive. 4 feet from heel to heel, and they were fresh. The thing from the clearing had been here. It had followed him back.